What's up, Leaf Nation? I'm Scott Willats, your in-arena host for your Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, in honor of Asian Heritage Month, the Toronto Maple Leafs wanted to normalize the celebration of Asian culture and heritage in hockey with a conversation. Now, I'm here to kind of steer that conversation and just kind of make it run, but I'm going to introduce you to some very, very important people in that space. Number one, he was drafted by his hometown Toronto Maple Leafs, active member of the Toronto Maple Leafs Alumni Board, supporting growing the game in the community. I present to you, Peter Ing.
Thanks so much for having me on the program today.
I'm digging your basement. You got to invite me over sometime as soon as COVID's over. Next up is the assistant professor at Queen's University. She's also the author of Changing on the Fly and a blogger on critical social and political issues in the sport of hockey. I present to you Dr. Courtney Szto. Courtney, how you doing, doctor?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me today.
No, thank you for being here. And last but not least, head coach, University of Toronto women's hockey team, Vicky Sunohara. Vicky, it's good for you to join us. Thank you. How you guys doing? How you doing, Vicky?
I'm good, Scott. Thanks a lot for having me today.
Now, because you're wearing the best jersey out of all of us here, I'm going to start the question with you. When did you fall in love with the game?
Hockey just kind of grabbed me at a very young age. It's a passion that chose me. And I remember getting my first hockey sticks at the age of 7 because I was already in love with the game. So, there wasn't necessarily a moment, but my mom grew up, born and raised in Windsor, and she was a Red Wings fan, so she imparted some of that on me. But obviously growing up in Vancouver, I am still a Canucks fan to this day. So that's kind of the origin story of my fandom.
Vicky, when did you fall in love?
Since, I have cassette tapes of my dad introducing the game and my dad and I playing in the basement. I think my first words are shoot and score. So I've loved it ever since I can remember. My dad he loved the game. He introduced it to me and I've loved it ever since.
Peter, a former Toronto Maple Leaf, part of the alumni. When did you fall in love with the game that you would end up playing?
Jeez, it goes so far back that it's hard to know. My dad tells me that I wouldn't sleep without my mini stick, and he finally remembers a time one night where I crawled out of my crib to get my stick and went back to bed and fell asleep. So I don't know, hockey took me away. It didn't matter how difficult or challenging the world may have been, but hockey was my happy place. And when I was playing, everything else disappeared, and I was truly in the moment. So it was a lot of things. It was that crisp air, the feel of the ice, the sound of skates, pucks off crossbars, fans, and maybe even robbing someone with a glove save. So I love the thrill to compete, the journey, and the ultimate feeling of camaraderie.
So you guys all come from different avenues, and Courtney, I'm going to start with you. What was your first encounter when you were critically aware of your identity? It's kind of a weird question, but when did you kind of see that you were different?
When I was very young, a random boy made it very clear to me that his AAA hockey credentials were far more valuable than anything that I could apparently offer as a young girl. But I think if we're talking about race, as an Asian, it wasn't really until a few years ago that my Chinese identity was externally imposed on me. It was at a Vancouver Giants game in Vancouver. I was chatting with this older white gentleman next to me, and I had mentioned that this was my first time watching a game in this rink, but that I had played there before. And he assumed that I meant figure skating, so I corrected him. I was like, no, I mean playing hockey. And he just kind of stares at me for a very long second, and then he says, oh, right, China has a team now. So that was kind of the first time that I can remember where someone was actively trying to reconcile my Asianness with my place at the rink in real time in front of me. So it was actually fairly recent.
I was fairly young, probably 6 years old, 6, 7 years old. And having people say that I shouldn't be playing because I was a girl. Girls don't play hockey. And it didn't come up often, but it did come up. And so I think that was probably my first experience. And then for my Asian heritage, my Japanese heritage, probably, about 10, 11, I was called names actually. And it came up either being called names or, my mom's of Ukrainian descent, and, she had light brown hair, blue eyes, and people often ask me, and again, not many, but you're adopted because, that can't be your mom. So a couple of those things came up at a younger age, but my mom was great. My father passed away actually as my coach when I was 7, so she took over and was at the rink with me, and I was very upset when I was called names, and she just said, "Vicky, they're calling you names because you're scoring goals, and the best way to get back at them is to score more goals." And
You
she
literally,
just,
yeah.
yeah,
Sorry,
I
go
mean,
on.
no, well, she just, educated me on that, and that I should be very proud of my background. And because there were times where I didn't know if I didn't want to be called names, and I didn't know if I wanted to play, because that was it was a time and a place where, it was very upsetting. And I remember those times, but, it's not that there were many. Actually, I had so much support, and, so many great friends, and, I've learned a lot, but I have had a lot of support through that. But there were those times that, I had a difficult time, I think, accepting that I look different.
The one thing I've heard from both of you two is that also being a female also was kind of a little bit of a part of kind of the upbringing and getting into this culture. Peter, for you, stepping right into kind of like a top skill level, what were the challenges that you kind of had to deal with when you kind of realized that I look a little different than everybody else on this team?
I do remember being called derogatory names, like for being Chinese, while on the ice, and I think some of that is, behind the mask, that everybody sees, but they know your name. And I think the worst for me was during heated times, like when the game was on the line and the other team's players would call me those names. And, was it the heat of battle? Was it to get me off my game? Was this how they generally felt about Chinese, or was it what everyone did during that period of time? Like, I'll honestly never know. But right now, it's good to see that education and efforts to create zero tolerance for all discrimination are, being enacted, and I really think we're heading in the right direction.
It's different, especially in your position. But was there somebody that you remember, growing up that looked like you, that you looked up to? And it doesn't have to be somebody who looked like you, but what do you remember being your first big role model, and for what reason?
It does expose a different challenge that I had. Our family is mixed heritage, but for some genetic reason, I guess I don't look as Chinese as the rest of my aunts, uncles, and cousins do. So when I was growing up, there were no NHL players of Chinese descent, and the only one that I'm aware of prior to me was Larry Kwong, and he played one game in 1947. So it's back when my dad was born, so it's decades before me. Although I may not have looked the same, being Chinese, I did identify with Bruce Lee, and I was totally inspired by his work ethic and his focus and his character, his moral code, and just how good he was at his chosen profession. So, and I identified with a lot of his quotes. They resonated with me, like, I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. So that goes back to, how I trained, and I think, trying to be a professional. But a family member actually gave me the name Xiaolong, which in Chinese means little dragon. And that's what they call Bruce Lee as well.
Showing off is a fool's idea of glory. That's my favorite.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm going to move it on to you, Vicky. Same question. Is there somebody that you looked up to in this game, or somebody that you looked up to that looked like you elsewhere that you remember kind of being a role model?
Growing up, there weren't many females playing. There weren't the opportunities. There wasn't a national team, at that time. So not really. It was probably my dad. I thought that he was a great player when, introducing the sport to me. I heard a lot about how well he did and kind of his avenues and where he played. He played at Ryerson. He had the opportunity to go to Michigan State as well. So I just remember, while he was alive and even after, just being that he had done very well and was so passionate. So I really, he was kind of the one that I looked up to. But there weren't many, weren't many females playing at the time, and there definitely weren't many with an Asian background that I could identify with.
Lucky for me, I don't know if this works in the Hollywood Square version, but it's Coach Sunohara for sure. Growing up, getting to watch her and Julie Chu, like that was a big deal for me. It's totally unexpected when I realized that they were on the team, and I was like, oh, it gives you the idea that something's possible, because nobody in my immediate family grew up playing hockey. Nobody in my extended family grew up playing hockey. So that was big, and I guess in the NHL world, I grew up around the time of Paul Kariya, so there were starting to be more Asian icons, but definitely Coach Sunohara and Julie Chu have long been idols for myself.
Courtney, I'm going to stick with you. With changing demographics, and especially specifically in the hockey community, because obviously we're representing the Toronto Maple Leafs over here, but we saw it happen with Jeremy Lin. What do you see the future of the game is for hockey? Could there be a Jeremy Lin? Could there be? We're living in the most multicultural city in the world, where everybody just lives and breathes the Leafs and the Raptors. Where do you see the future of the game going?
The potential is there for a very diverse game that is equitable and sustainable. The problem is that we have been led to believe that the demographics of Timbits hockey represents the future of the game. So yes, grassroots hockey is more diverse than it has ever been, mind you, with a pretty low bar as a standard. So the system that we have created in hockey, but in most competitive sports in Canada, we stream our young athletes at a very young age, and that grassroots programming is quite disconnected from the high performance stream. So in order for diversity to actually move through the development pipeline, we have to open up and better fund the grassroots program, but also make it possible for people to have a legitimate shot to get recruited and scouted at older ages. Hockey academies pose a significant hurdle for us. They will have to want to develop more diverse talent and drastically reduce their fees, if not completely change the fee structure altogether. Because if the path to elite hockey continues to come with a price tag of $10,000 to $30,000 per season, the future of the game actually looks quite bleak. So this is probably not the inspiring projection that you're looking for, but if we look at NCAA rosters, U Sports, U18 development rosters, it looks pretty similar to the status quo. But again, there is potential if we make some big changes today. And we're seeing some of those with Boston Bruins announced yesterday a mentorship program. Black Girl Hockey announced a mentorship program that's launching this summer. So those are the things that will arguably have a bigger impact on the game than us just trying to usher in a lot of racialized kids into grassroots hockey programs.
So just stick with that point really quickly. Do you think there's a bar to be hit, and is that a financial bar that's being hit, or is there something a little deeper?
It's both. It's racism in the game, and it's an extremely expensive game. So I think a lot of times we mistakenly roll out free equipment and learn to play programs as a way to address a lack of diversity in the game. The two are definitely interconnected, but a lot of players that I talk to, they can afford to go to academies. They can afford all the extra opportunities, but they're still not being scouted and recruited because of this stereotype that Asians don't know hockey. They're not committed. Their families have a different cultural belief. So there's still a lot of work that we need to do to dismantle those ideas within the game, while also making it more affordable and accessible.
Peter, I'm going to go over to you. How has the idea of representation changed over your career?
When I started my career in Toronto, I was so focused on playing the game that I didn't think about representation per se, but I quickly became aware of the pride that arose in the Chinese community, being the first Leafs goalie or player actually of Chinese descent and first NHL goalie of Chinese descent. As a result, I started to see Chinese reporters and publications that had not traditionally covered hockey. whenever possible, after games in Toronto, our family, which several generations, would meet at Sai Wu's restaurant in Chinatown, and the place would be packed, and the community was truly embracing to us. I'm not sure I'd say that representation really changed for me over my career, but my Chinese family had a high honor and pride in their family name, as I think most families do. But it always stuck with me, and to see my name on the back of a Leafs jersey was an incredible honor. And they say with great honor comes great responsibility. So probably the biggest change for me is that now I embrace my opportunities to represent in positive ways, instead of maybe shying away from them.
You get to embody that face that a lot of Leaf fans, and I know, Peter, you're like me. We do events in Keswick and all over Ontario, and you get to be that face. Does it feel like added pressure, or how do you approach, kind of people that don't associate your look with this game?
It's really cool to represent as an alumni. We really have a great opportunity and place to connect with fans. When you're playing the game, it's really difficult. Time-wise, it's difficult to actually be out there just with the notoriety and everything that comes along with it. But after you're done, it's really an opportunity for the alumni to get out there to places like you said, the small towns, the places that the team that's currently playing just can't do. And one thing that we've always said is, once a Leaf, always a Leaf. So it doesn't matter whether you wore the jersey one time. You're a member of our team, and it doesn't matter what kind of career you even had. I just remember times going to some towns where a player may have come from, or their background or history resonates with certain fans, and it's amazing how everyone gravitates to them. And you would think, well, hey, we've got this star over here that plays 1,000 games, and you go but they're all over talking to one of our alumni that maybe doesn't have the same profile, but in that area they do, or to that person they do. And I love the stories of and I've heard them a couple, and it just gives you a sense of pride. That moment that you that save you made on Gretzky, or that was the time when I became a Leaf fan, or that's the time I became a hockey fan. And those are cool moments. So yeah, it's awesome to get out in the community. And if anything, this COVID scenario is really something that we'd like to get over, because our guys like to be out there, and they like to be part of it, like to be part of what the Leafs are doing, and contributing to growing the sport in general.
Yeah, which is a perfect segue to get to Vicky, because you become a leader in women's hockey. So how is the idea, there's kind of the same question of representation, changed for you over your career? Because people who know you know you.
I really think that my answer is very similar to Peter's. I didn't really pay much attention, to it. I just, I think when we had the opportunity to go to Japan for the 1998 Olympics, was a pretty special time, and I've always it's always a huge honor to represent Canada, and obviously identify as a Canadian, but then have the opportunity to also represent the Japanese Canadian community. And that, I think, after the 98 Olympics, more so in my career, coming back and being kind of honored at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center. So I think it was a great honor in both ways, as a proud Canadian, but also a proud Japanese Canadian. And I think that that kind of opened the doors for young girls to that were playing, or maybe they got involved in young girls, but also girls of Asian heritage, I think, and just being able to meet or, have emails or kids that came to my hockey school that they wanted to play hockey because they saw that I played and that it was possible. So I think it's changing, not just for me, for many girls, and then girls watching great role models, great leaders from diverse backgrounds. So I think that's kind of the beginnings for me.
I'm going to try to put there's two questions. I'm going to try to put them in together. What are the steps that the hockey community can take from welcoming and being inclusive? That's kind of for all races. And then also, it's kind of two parts of a question, but I'll let you guys have at it. What can I or Leaf Nation do to help support the fight of anti-Asian racism? And I'll start with you, Doctor.
I mean, this question about moving from being welcoming to inclusive, I think my question would be, is it actually welcoming now? If we think of the layout of most rinks that are not community centers, they don't even have a front desk to welcome people. And if it physically exists, it's oftentimes doesn't have anybody there. So that's one simple thing we need to look at, is the actual physical space of the rink. But more important, I would say, in order for people to feel included, there has to be a system of accountability. We have long dealt with issues of racism, homophobia, sexism, what have you, in-house. Players haven't had anywhere to turn with their experiences. So there has to be external oversight and a way for people to speak their truth without fear of retribution. What I've learned over the years is that we have not designed a system where a positive and healthy experience is the consistent end result. If and when people do have an overall positive experience, it is by chance, not by design. So yes, it is possible to have good experiences in hockey. I'm certainly one of those people, but we should not be leaving this up to luck. And this, again, it goes beyond racism, because we still have no out NHL players, current or former. There's still a lack of investment in the women's hockey game so that they can make a living wage playing. Stories of abusive coaches come out what seem like weekly. So all of these things contribute to the ideas and practices that make hockey exclusive and limited in its potential. So I think the things like oversight and accountability, designing a culture and infrastructure where the end goal is a positive experience designed around retention in the game is super important. The reality is that very few people who step on the ice will get to make a living playing the game, but we want them to stick around. We want them to work in media. We want them to coach. We want them to be the team physician or nutritionist. And we don't want them to question putting their kids into hockey, which unfortunately a lot of people are doing right now. With respect to Leafs Nation, I think you need to call out anti-Asian racism, whether it's your friends and family or coworkers. It might just be once or twice that you have to have that conversation, but for Asian people, that is a consistent conversation that we have to find ourselves navigating. So if you can help alleviate some of the labor for us, that's super helpful. And I think just educating yourself. I like to direct people to learning through food. The Ugly Delicious series on Netflix is a wonderful way to learn about culture and food and the history of racism that is actually kind of connected through all of it. So for any foodies out there, I would suggest checking that Netflix series out.
I definitely agree with, all of what she had to say. I think, things like this panel is a great step. I think it's long overdue that these things are happening, but they are happening, and so I think it's positive. And I think having leaders who don't just kind of put it on the agenda, but believe in wanting to make things better and acting on it. I think that's definitely what's necessary, and to not just making it welcoming, but making it inclusive. And the leadership is key. And I do believe that it is it's slowly changing, but as Courtney mentioned, there's many different areas that need to be addressed and that need to be thought of, but not just talked about, acted upon.
Having strong voices like Courtney and Vicky that are articulate and have credentials, I think are, huge in the movement. Things may not be changing as quickly as we like them to, and at times we may actually be regressing, or it certainly feels like that. But I do sense an overall movement of inclusion and embracing diversity, and that's across all topics. So I agree with Vicky as well. Like the fact that we're having a panel discussion during Asian Heritage Month is a perfect example of moving the ball forward. So I'm not sure though that it's a simple hockey community question. And I can just speak to a little bit of, I'm speaking more to the Chinese side of it, just because I know more about that than the rest of the Asian community. But knowing the history of Chinese immigrants and how they helped build the railroad that literally connected this nation starting in the 1880s, and then understanding how the Chinese were discriminated against by our country, starting with the first of 3 head taxes in 1885, 1900, and 1903, followed by the full Chinese Exclusion Act. And that wasn't repealed until 1947. So that's 62 years worth of documented Chinese exclusion, by our government. So, it's wonderful in 2006 to see the Canadian government actually officially acknowledge and apologize for this period of time. And I believe that's what sets the stage for reconciliation and healing to then trickle down to sports like hockey. Specific to hockey, like I do personally applaud the efforts of teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs, who started running hockey camps in China. And the attempt was to grow the game and to be inclusive. So I personally represented the Leafs on several of these initiatives in Shenzhen, in Beijing, and Shanghai. And because of my heritage, I was afforded some incredible opportunities to meet with the top ministers. And I had the honor of presenting Beijing with a 2022 Leafs jersey for being awarded the Winter Olympic Games. And this was in front of 100 million viewers on CCTV. So between this and all the interviews, we certainly gave exposure to hockey. And now the NHL's taken over the efforts in China. So hopefully it's going to grow further than that. On the home front, and my time as president of the Toronto Maple Leafs alumni, our members committed to raising over $100,000 per year for MLSE's Hockey in the Neighborhood. So this program provides opportunities for children from diverse backgrounds to learn the great game of hockey. And it's awesome to see our alumni members also assist with the on-ice training. So hopefully these types of initiatives snowball into creating a fully inclusive community, like Courtney was speaking of.
Yeah, no, I agree with all 3 of you. Sometimes you guys don't know how far your reach goes. I think, Peter, you were just kind of saying that. And Vicky and Courtney, I think you guys are all agree. Sometimes you don't know the platform that you're on, how far you can reach. And awareness is just all that I think is needed right now. And it's panels like this that are creating that. So I just want to thank you guys for your time today. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but with people like you, you 3 leading the way, we're going to flush out this ridiculous hate out of the way in the real, just get that out of the way, and hopefully make everything more inclusive for everybody that loves this game like we all do. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.